Well, friends, welcome back to Barriers and Boundaries, Resilience Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, EB, and today is a unique conversation that we're going to have. Janakan, welcome to the show, buddy.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Goodness gracious. 2008 in Hong Kong when we first met, and that
Wow.
was random as it could be. I can't believe it's been almost 20 years.
Yeah, it's been 18 years. Our friendship is now an adult.
Yeah, and goodness, reconnected in Singapore a little while ago, and now I'm back stateside, and man, just excited to hear about what's new with you, hear about what you're into, because I know it's really good stuff, and I think it's just definitely worthy of opening this aperture into leadership. So, CEO of leaders.org and invited. Oh man, I'll let you kind of share like what those are about for a guest.
Sure. Well, first, a bit of my backstory. So I've been an entrepreneur now for more than 18 years. My first company was very successful, had more than 100 million users, one of the top producers of games. And then I thought I was a genius. And then my second business was basically a disaster. Actually, and it's from that disaster that all this leadership stuff came out because I had to let go of most of my team. And I asked one of them why I failed. And he basically said, well, you don't know anyone. And so in 2018, I went on this kind of network where I would just connect with as many people as possible with no agenda. Um, and that's kind of, yeah, led to what we're doing now.
And that leads to a discussion of how relationships are like currency in a sense, right? Is that a good estimate from your perspective?
I don't love the comparison with currency because I think it implies it sounds transactional, and I think the best relationships are not transactional. I think the best and most productive relationships come from a serendipitous generosity mindset, which ultimately results in lots of winning for everyone.
Well, there's certainly an aspect where you can be well connected, but also not trusted at the same time. I think it's important to capitalize on, one's character as a leader. Leaders.org started around 2018 when you kind of went on that venture.
Yeah, so I first just started reading a lot and discovered some of my favorite books on this topic. The first is Never Eat Alone, which by Keith Ferrazzi or something. I absolutely love it. It's an easy read. Everything you need to know is in those three words. Really, it's basically use your meals to connect with people and build relationships, and it's just so powerful. And then I read this 1970s paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. Have you come across it before?
No, no. I'm gonna have to look this up.
So it's fascinating. So it basically says in your life, you have strong ties and you have weak ties. And so your strong ties are the people you know very well. Your weak ties are people you've met a very long time ago. So in a sense, we would be weak ties. We don't talk on a particularly regular basis. And so what this paper showed is that most groundbreaking ideas, opportunities, new jobs, new relationships, friendships, mentorships, all this kind of stuff, it comes from your weak ties, not your strong ties. And that's because your strong ties, they know you very well, but they know the same people, ideas, and opportunities that you do because they inhabit the same circles of life. And so basically, I mean, that's what the paper says, but if you kind of extrapolate a little bit, I think wise leaders kind of invest a small percentage of their time into building and maintaining these weak ties.
Okay.
If you're hiring someone to do a job, it's a transactional relationship by definition, which is fine. You know, we need some relationships should be transactional, but I think the idea here is kind of having lots of diverse friendships with people who are from different, or not even friendships, acquaintanceships with people from diverse backgrounds and worldviews and industries and stages of life. This is actually what gives you access to this broad world of opportunity. I don't think that has much to do with barriers. I think there's reasons people don't do it, even though it's a sensible thing to do, but I don't see it as a boundary issue.
How much work does a leader really have to do on themselves to become like a better leader or a great leader? I know leaders.org, you talk about it being lonely at the top for a lot of leaders.
Yeah, it is lonely at the top, especially for certain types of leaders. You know, founders, as an example, they have to tell everybody all the time that everything is amazing, even when it's not. So I think that is a lonely existence. But trust, I mean, there's so many factors that go to trust. Trust within kind of broader networks, acquaintance networks, is a little bit different from trust with your family or the people that you lead. And so I think trust within broader networks comes from two things. The first is a genuine, authentic interest and passion for other people's lives. Now, you can't transform 1,000 people that you know, but you can be very interested in their lives and ask lots of interesting questions and be interested. And then you can be generous, not with everything that you have, because maybe that's where boundaries come in. You can't give everyone everything that you have, but you can be. I love. There's a book called Give and Take, which you may have read, which talks about this idea of a 5 minute favor, which is, if you can quickly introduce two people as an example and it's going to help them both, and it takes 5 minutes of your time, it creates disproportionate value and therefore creates trust. So I'm very, as you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about these weak ties and what they mean for society, especially in kind of the age of AI.
That's gonna be one of those ongoing questions for the next few years is what do leaders do with AI and how do they implement it into their leadership philosophies, and just a fascinating exploration. I had a question about you're having meetings, you bring C-suite level people together. Is that correct with leaders.org?
Yeah, exactly. So for the last 5 years or so, that's exactly what we've been doing. I mean, since the pandemic lifted, is bringing these different, they're not always C-level, but senior leaders together to have no cost, no agenda coffees at a very fancy hotel in Singapore. And it's just an amazing experience. And it's a 15-month wait list to join. But it's an amazing experience because it's quite countercultural. You're coming in really with no agenda. You don't know what you're going to get. You don't know who you're going to meet. The topic of discussion is what's your biggest challenge. And yeah, it's just a fascinating experience. So I really believe in the power of that. A funny story about that is that you need to, for those kind of sessions to work, you need some commonality. But as soon as you have some commonality, you actually want near randomness. So we've run hundreds of events. We've done like curated events for CFOs and topic events about this and that. But our highest performing event was one where we invited 8 people whose first name was Keith. So really, just it's interesting the things that will trigger discussion and foster trust and make people help each other. So that's most of what we've been doing for the last how many years, but literally the last 2 weeks, I've been kind of testing this with society as a whole in Singapore and doing open coffees where literally anybody who wants to come is welcome. And that has been fascinating in its own right.
I definitely miss Singapore. I would love to join you back in Singapore. Goodness, definitely one of the best 5 years of my life. And the goal just have an open invitation to sit down and chat.
For leaders, it's to help each other. So it's if I can share a challenge, you might have a different perspective or mindset, or you might know somebody that can help me, or you might have read a book that gives me a new idea. So the idea with the leaders roundtables is pretty much that, is to tap into weak ties in order to help people achieve their or overcome their challenges. I think it's similar for the kind of general, more open events, but of course the type of challenges which people face is much more diverse and much more interesting, in my opinion.
Do you get a sense of authenticity with these leaders that you meet? Do you feel like they're pretty open? I mean, they choose to come to a meeting that is kind of centered on that.
Yes. So I think there's two things. The first you've totally touched on just now is there is a selection bias here. And so I think my estimate is about 15% of the population is very open to strategic serendipity. Whether or not they call it that or have a word for it, they're very open to this. And so they come with a very open mind and they're not expecting anything, but they're excited, and that's how they get the most out of it. But I think it's also quite important as a moderator or a host to create that culture of vulnerability very quickly. Otherwise, leaders in particular can default to, I'm amazing, we're doing amazing things, we doubled our profit in the last 5 seconds approach. So actually, I mentioned at the beginning that our first business was very successful and our second business was pretty much a disaster. And actually, I find that is a quick way for us to kind of create the right culture. Because on the one hand, if we'd never achieved anything as a team, I don't know how much senior leaders would take us seriously. Leaders often hear the kind of like failure to success story told from the point of success, which doesn't really create vulnerability. But the success to failure story 100% creates vulnerability.
You don't typically hear the reverse conversation taking place. Eh, And in that authenticity, I wanna put that in the workplace for a second. How do you handle or how have you engaged with leaders they view authenticity as a license to be unfiltered?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it comes down to what is the purpose of leadership and what does a good leader look like? And so for me, a great leader is somebody who really cares about the needs of the people that they're leading, as well, of course, as the organization objective. But I think you need both. And so if authentic means that you are making somebody feel small or unwelcome or unincluded, then it is not strategic authenticity. Whereas authenticity, which is like, this is honestly how I feel, and I'm sharing this with you because I think it can help you grow in some way. But you're totally free equally to push back and challenge me. I think that is very healthy authenticity.
That ability to challenge, is that something that you felt like you did not experience when you were younger and that you see more common today?
I mean, you lived in Asia for a long time, and I grew up in Asia. There's huge cultural differences. There's huge cultural norms around the extent to which you can challenge authority. Yeah, and I read a fascinating theory. Sorry to go on a bit of a rabbit hole, but I read a
No.
fascinating theory around the idea that this comes from basically rice farming versus wheat farming. So the theory basically says that when you grow rice, you have to flood your field. And what it means is that if you mess up your farm, your neighbor's farm is also going to be ruined. Okay. But wheat farming, now I've never been a farmer, so I don't know if this is correct. Wheat farming is much more individual in that if you mess up your farm, it doesn't really dramatically affect your neighbor. And as a result, in rice growing cultures, which is most of East and South Asia, which of course is where I've lived most of my life, there's a huge amount of, well, a social lens put on everything. Harmony is highly prioritized over individual rights. As a result, things like respect are extremely important, Confucian worldviews, that kind of stuff. I think in Asia, we naturally have much lower tendency to challenge authority.
Where do you see leadership in your circles struggling to adapt with something new, maybe AI?
Well, I think the big disruptor of our decade is AI, and I have become increasingly pessimistic about its impact on society. I still think it'll eventually be a net positive, and of course, from a faith perspective, I do believe God is in control of everything. But I see many scenarios in which it causes significant damage to our society. So, on the most extreme, I'm reading a book at the moment called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies, which basically talks about if we build super intelligence or human level intelligence, we are not going to be able to control it. So that's kind of the most extreme. I do think they have some pretty sound arguments actually in their book. But even if we don't go to that extreme, we're already seeing a lot of young people lose their jobs, or rather not even be able to get jobs because those country level positions are being replaced by AI. Now, there's research, I don't know exactly from where, but there's research which says that if you hit something like 25, 28% unemployment, you almost certainly are going to end up in war or major civil unrest or war because people just feel excluded from society, excluded from the economy. And yet we are kind of hurtling extremely fast towards that kind of a scenario. And I don't think that the big tech companies particularly care. And because we have this geopolitical rivalry, I don't think anyone's going to stop.
Yeah, it's all about competition these days, that's for sure. Man, so you experience a lot of engagement with senior leaders who have been in their roles for a while. What about the opposite end of that spectrum? Let's say you're meeting someone who is just stepping into a leadership role. What type of mentoring, encouragement, advice, food for thought that you're going to offer them as they get started on their own leadership journey?
It's a great question. Two things: one, an encouragement, and well, I guess two is also an encouragement. But the encouragement is actually, I think, middle management is in some ways the safest from this AI revolution for the near future because they've kind of gone through the initial skill learning phase, and so they're still in demand, but they're not so expensive yet that organizations are rushing to eliminate them. So it's quite a good place to be, kind of a middle manager, early leader. But I think something which I hear a lot is you need to build networks before you need them. And so I think that wise leaders, even if you are in a stable job and you're very happy and you're in a happy relationship and all this kind of stuff, it's still very wise to spend a tiny percentage of your time, a couple hours a month, going and doing something totally random with people you normally would not connect with. And I think that is because it enables you to gain that insight and gain those relationships, which become, you can then tap into them when you need them. Because I think, especially in the age of like this age of AI, I think disruption happens very fast. And so if all of your kind of relationships are in your industry or all your relationships are with people with the same worldview, then it's actually a very brittle place to be. And that's because we're entering a world in which an entire industry or an entire profession can be replaced in less than 1 year. And so if you don't have connections elsewhere, then although we lots of people are going to be deeply affected by I think it becomes much harder to do a career switch, for example, which is much easier when you know people who are doing totally different things. I think that transactional and strategic are different things. So transactional, and maybe I'm abusing these words, but for me, transactional is very much like I'm only interested in you if you have value to add to my life. I am self interested, but not everything needs to immediately deliver value to me. I'm interested in delivering value to other people. So, as an example, in our leaders roundtables, when we first started, or actually when people come for the first time, if they've never attended, they can be very confused. The reason they can be confused is that literally we don't charge anything and we don't make any sales pitches. Okay. Now, in Singapore, that's very unusual because usually there's an agenda or there's a fee, like a membership fee, or at the end of it, even if it's free, there's a pitch at the end for please upgrade to XYZ. And so people come with this expectation that even though we say it's no agenda, there is probably an agenda. And so they'll go through the whole thing kind of sitting a little bit defensive. And then at the end, we're like, thank you for coming, bye bye, go away. And then they're very confused because they're like, where's the sales pitch? Right. And because these are intelligent people, at least 95% of the time, someone will stop and be like, hey, wait a minute. How do you guys do this? Why do you do this? And in that but then becomes permission for us to share a little bit about our vision and the challenges we face and the things we're testing. And the sense of reciprocity that kicks in at that point is so high that people will almost inevitably introduce us to people way above our pay grade. And there, you wouldn't be able to buy those introductions or relationships ever. And so that to me is a strategic approach without being transactional, because even if someone came and didn't ask that question, we'd still be very grateful that they came and participated. But we do understand the psychology of how it works, and therefore we do this. And I talk about it, and I've realized this is quite, I find this amusing, is that sometimes when you tell people how you're manipulating them, they feel much better. Manipulation is a strong word, but in these coffees, like I said, the last 2 weeks, I've been doing lots of random coffees, and people do ask me lots of questions like, why are you doing this? And I'll say, I'm doing it because I believe in the power of weak ties and this, that, and the other. But I also know that if I buy you a coffee right now, and I've invited you to this lovely space and I bought you a coffee, there is this reciprocity effect, which means that you're going to feel somewhat obliged to help me if I ever ask you for help. Okay. I'm not asking you for help, but I know that I'm basically manipulating you. And I tell them this and they love it. They're like, oh, this is so great. This is such a great idea. It's
You
very
got it. You
strange.
got it, Janakan. Anytime you need help, you just give me a call.
Yeah. So it's humans are weird. It's like you can be like almost sometimes being strategic or being openly manipulative and telling people what you're doing is actually a non-transactional behavior because it's not like this immediate show me what you can give me. I believe it's almost flattering. I believe that you're going to be someone of such importance that it's worth me investing in this relationship now. So
Putting down a deposit for a future expense. I love that. And two, I don't think you're abusing those words. And the piece on value added, I thought this was interesting. So I'm project manager, PMP, masters in program management, all that stuff. They just updated the book of knowledge for project managers. And there was a heavy emphasis on focusing on the value of the project, which was not in previous editions. So I'm actually fascinated with that because I've always been about how can I be value added to the organization. It's not so much how can I be successful and get from the organization, but how do I view my work as an art form where I'm giving to the organization, which is way more fulfilling for me.
I think at the top level, it's not, people don't necessarily think about what's the value I'm adding because they just assume they're adding value, often because they're paid so much that if they're not adding value, they would have been kicked out. But I think what you're saying is a very powerful worldview, which separates very good leaders from very bad ones, which is how much do you care about your people? I think the title of this podcast with boundaries is important. You do need boundaries, but within that, leaders who deeply care about the people that they lead, people feel that and therefore want to work for them. And I think in the age of AI, I think it's a very powerful question to ask because I've been in countless closed door conversations with leaders who are kind of like, you no longer actually need this many people, but we also feel quite bad about firing them. And so a question, and often they're trying to find ways to kind of retain them, which I think it can be a healthy and unhealthy thing. Like it can be unhealthy if you take it too far, but it can be healthy because it shows a compassion and passion for your people. But a question which I often ask people to kind of clarify is if you could click your fingers, let's say you have 100 people and you now only need 40 because AI has replaced 60. If you could click your fingers and ensure that all 60 of those people were now in new jobs, not in your organization, but they were in new jobs and flourishing, would you do it? And a lot of people say yes. And so actually they are retaining people because they want to honor some kind of social contract with those people. The challenge is if you do that too much, then you can end up being uncompetitive and therefore sacrifice the well-being of everybody. So I think it's compassion, but you need boundaries as well.
Being disciplined for what's gonna protect them in the long run too. That's I mean, man, what a great insight to think about not just your own objectives and mission and vision for your organization, but what's the future. You almost don't want people to miss an opportunity to stay employed and then get to a point where it's too late for them to get employed somewhere else. Man, that's pretty heavy, man.
Yeah, but I think it's a heavy season to be honest. Like I am concerned because the previous technologies generally still needed a human in control. Yes, the technology would make you farm better or produce more, but I think the goal of technology companies today is to create human level intelligence. And if you have human level intelligence, then you don't need anywhere near as many humans in control. And I think our entire economic system is built on this assumption that everyone has some economically valuable things to contribute. And if that is no longer true, we have a societal crisis because you can talk about things like universal basic income, but actually most people want to work and most people want to feel like they're contributing value. And they don't just, it's not just about the paycheck, it's the identity that comes from, I feel good because I've made someone else's life better.
And they're not all gonna be prompt engineers or data scientists managing the intelligence that AI gets.
Yeah. But I think the way that we survive it, well, I think the societies that thrive and survive are the ones that build diverse connections where there's this high level of interconnectedness. So when one sector gets, to use a biblical analogy, it's the if one part of the body is hurting, everybody is hurting. And so, but if you have a healthy interconnected body, then that part of the body is going to heal much faster. And so I think that if interconnected societies where rich people hang out with poor people and conservative people hang out with liberal people and ethnically different races and ethnic groups hang out with each other is just it's much more resilient. So that's my new obsession.
One of the things that I feel like I've picked up over the past, year of doing this show is there's a lot of resilience tied to curiosity.
Yes.
And being curious about other cultures is a huge curiosity I think leaders need to have because, man, you're just adding a depth chart of strengths to your organization. When you're open to the difference between the rice and the wheat fields, when you are open to hearing about, yeah, maybe we don't flood our neighbor's farm, that might be countercultural to some. But I think it starts with that curiosity of, is this the only way to do something? Is this the only opportunity that we're going to have?
Mm.
Forget the book. I think it's in What is the Bible? He's talking about holding a diamond up to the light and you get a reflection from that diamond, but if you turn it just a little bit, you're going to get a different reflection. As leaders, it's challenging ourselves to like hold up whatever situation, AI. Is there okay, we're getting a perspective of AI of it taking jobs or whatever, and can we turn that diamond that of AI just a little bit and get a different perspective? How does this create opportunities for more workers, or does it? And just go down that. And how does this change the vision of our organization? And you turn it again, and you just, I don't know. I think there's a lot of opportunity to reevaluate. And
Mm.
if you're an organization that is not reevaluating with AI, maybe shame on you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've got that's a great insight, and thanks for sharing that. I think I do agree with you. There's usually two sides to the coin, and with AI as an example, I do see a lot of positives come out of it, like improved medication, improved learning for kids who can't afford, very good schools. They can have personalized learning at a scale never seen before. So there's definitely going to be positives, even though I am generally quite pessimistic now. But I think the other thing is a realization that sometimes different cultures or different views have strengths at different times, or they didn't emerge for no reason. They emerged out of some kind of necessity, and so therefore they are the ideal solution to some kind of problem. So, as an example, and I hope, well, I don't think I'll offend anyone by saying this, but I was hanging out with lots of Malaysians yesterday. You've lived in Singapore. Malaysia is generally a much more laid back culture. There's a lot more sitting, eating, people join in, people leave, much more relaxed in general than Singapore. Now, what we were talking about is this Singapore hyper focused kind of approach was probably the ideal strategy for the last 40 years, which is why hyper discipline, which is why it's doing extremely well economically. But in a world with greater shocks and greater uncertainty, maybe we do need to go become a bit more Malaysian and have more sitting around eating supper with a bunch of random people where people are randomly coming in. And I think it's almost like deterministic versus stochastic type approach to things. In a deterministic world, you put in X, you're going to get Y. You guaranteed. And I think much of the past has been the recent past has been deterministic. If you work hard and you get your university degree from a top university and you get your internship, then you're guaranteed and you're going to be able to buy a house, and that house is going to be worth more when you retire, and it's all going to be amazing. But we're entering this world where we have to work with uncertainties, where it's kind of like, okay, well, if you go to university, you have a slightly better chance of getting a good job, but there's no guarantee. And
Yeah, it's
so,
definitely that's a massive conversation to have as well when you start to engage, and even from taking it back to that leader's perspective, who are you looking to bring onto your team, and what are you evaluating in a candidate for your organization? There's depends on the person, I guess. It depends on the leader, depends on what the vision is, but can they make things align or not? It's good stuff.
what's on your mind these days with leadership?
Accountability. I love authenticity in leadership, but as I mentioned earlier, I don't think that's a license for being unfiltered. So I'm very curious about the conversation of leaders being held accountable. We're seeing that, there's stories about, I think, Sherm right now that's hit up with a lawsuit. But I think one of the buzzwords for 2026 coming up is going to be more accountability. We've gone through psychological safety in the workplace. We've talked about being value added. Accountability's kind of been hanging around with growth mindset for a number of years. But how do we do accountability well is going to be one of the things that kind of leads my next year in conversations.
I'm fascinated about if you have any views on what accountability looks like in this AI era, because agents can't be accountable. So,
Yeah.
what do you do if you're managing a workforce of agents? Are you accountable for them?
You get into some of the data science aspects of it. What are you feeding the machine as far as what intelligence is? And how do you make sure that that's protected and accountable? You're not misleading. And it's funny. You get into a conversation with AI. Wait a second, that's not true.
Right. Yeah.
So it's not perfect
Yeah.
by any means. But how do you hold the data accountable?
Mm. Mm.
I think it's going to be right up there.
Yeah. There's a lot of talk about humans being hired to basically just be accountable. So they manage a team of agents. These agents make decisions, but at the end of the day, you need a human to sign off, and therefore the human is on major decisions. The human is ultimately accountable. But this reminds me, have you ever seen a TV show, How I Met Your Mother?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And there's Barney Stinson. Stinson, I don't know if you remember him, but he's got this extremely well paid job, which throughout the entire TV show they don't tell you what it is, right? So throughout the TV show, people say, "What do you do?" And he just says, "Please," right? And so they don't explain it until the last season, when they finally get him to explain what it is, and he explains that it's an acronym, which is something like provide legal exculpatory something and sign everything. So basically, his job is to sign everything, take all the legal risk, and get paid extremely well on the understanding that if something goes wrong, then he's the fall guy. And I wonder to what extent are we all just gonna is our job title gonna be please? We don't really understand what these agents are doing, but it's our job to sign off, and we get paid very well to do that.
Man, that is very prophetic in that show doing that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, I know I've taken up quite a bit of your time, but how do those listening, how do those learn more about you, learn about leaders.org and stay up to date with you? And
Yeah, you can just go to leaders.org or find me on LinkedIn is probably the best. I try a lot of experiments. Most of them fail. But if you want to follow along on my journey of trying things, then yeah, connect with me on LinkedIn.
I love that. And if you're in Singapore, please try to connect with him and maybe
Yeah.
get invited to one of his meetups. And man, I definitely enjoyed the last time we got together, and we had coffee, and that was a good time as
Yeah.
well. Man, best wishes from stateside, and yeah, we look forward to seeing what you get up to in the next year, in the future.
Thank you.
All right, my friends, that was Janakan, CEO of leaders.org, and also invited there in Singapore. Just a good conversation about leadership in general. Where's it headed? The things that we've learned and talked about. Hopefully, just raise questions for you. I'm definitely going to be checking out the article, The Strength of Weak Ties, that he talked about. I'll put a link if I can find it in the notes there. And also, he talked about Adam Grant's book, Give and Take. Man, so well read and so poised to have conversations about what it means to be a leader in today's world, the challenges, and some may look at it as a barrier of being AI. Some may look at it as a boundary that they can work within that framework. But really, what does it mean to sit and talk and explore your own philosophy of leadership? And that is what I truly believe will lead to resilience in the organization or in your personal life. Being able to be curious and have conversations, be vulnerable, be authentic, but not unfiltered to a degree where it hurts others, all the things that we just got into, hopefully value added to your own thought process of what it means to be a leader. We're going to keep fighting the good fight. We're going to keep fighting for resilience. And until next time, EB out here.